Drilling a head of state is something you just don't do for several reasons, one of which is you put a target on your own head of state. And you can be sure that the Iranian military has people thinking about and working on how do we kill the guy who killed our leader.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. We're doing a double episode today as there is so much going on between the US, Iran, and Israel. And just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on the Trump Report YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Today, my guest is Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, and an author in an array of books on Donald Trump, and of course, a crowd favorite of the show, Professor David Cay Johnston. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Glad to be with you again, Maddie.
We have to start with, of course, Operation Epic Fury that took place over the weekend. I want to get your thoughts and your immediate reactions to Saturday, but I also want to get your thoughts, Professor, on whether you think the US military would have predicted that the conflict would escalate and see retaliatory strikes in Dubai, in Doha, Amman, and then now, of course, Lebanon.
The U.S. military war games everything. I was told once by someone who does war games that they had even war gamed a future nuclear exchange between Santiago, Chile, and Buenos Aires. So I'm sure that this was well thought through, that the Iranians would try and draw in the other Middle East countries that operate under an assumed protective umbrella from the United States.
And the argument online, Professor, is that many things can be true at the same time. So I want to get your thoughts on what people have been saying. So a lot of people say you can hate the Ayatollah, you can acknowledge that the supreme leader of Iran was evil. You can hope that the United States wins and can orchestrate a swift regime change while knowing how challenging that will be. But you can also believe that the president should have gone to Congress and be wary that a regime change under President Trump might mirror the uncertainty the Venezuelans are currently living in. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first and foremost, the American Constitution vests in Congress alone the power to go to war. Now, the Congress has given some limited authorized use of military force to presidents, but is a defensive measure. And there's no immediate threat to the United States from anything the Iranians are doing. They don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. They don't have nuclear weapons, according to nobody higher than Donald Trump. And remember that Donald Trump ran for office in 2016, 2020, 2024, saying, if you vote for the other guy, we're going to get a war in Iran. And I won't do that. I'm the peace president. So complete violation of that principle. Um, Awful as the Khomeini regime has been, it's not much worse than the previous dictator, the Shah Rabi Plaza, who the U.S. put in power in the early 50s by overthrowing, along with the British and French, the democratic elected Mossadegh government. And how well has regime change to impose democracy worked? Well, let's see. We tried it in Haiti, absolute failure. We tried it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Venezuela, the same group are still in power. We just removed President Maduro. This is not a useful strategy. And then finally, drilling a head of state is something you just don't do for several reasons, one of which is you put a target on your own head of state. And you can be sure that the Iranian military has people thinking about and working on how do we kill the guy who killed our leader.
Well, Professor, that's what Trump says. He says, I got to him first.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that he'll never be gotten to. But the Ayatollah wasn't trying to kill Donald Trump. And the Ayatollah and those around him had marked for death Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who, despite this, Donald Trump took away General Milley's security detail. He's retired now, which tells you about Trump's callous disregard for American lives.
If the arrest of Maduro has not produced a straightforward regime change in Venezuela, how can Iranians be sure that they won't be living in anarchy for the coming months or years?
Well, I think well, I think I've said on your show, the Iranian regime is not stable. If you kill 7 or 30,000 of your people in the streets, you're not a stable regime. But Tehran has an absolute monopoly on violence. You don't have armed militias. You don't have people who are in a position to overthrow the government unless the military leaders there want to abandon the government that they have been with for almost a half a century. And there's no indication in any of the leaked intelligence material around the world that there is an effort to replace the theocratic leaders.
Jonathan Carl from the ABC, he tweeted, Professor, that Trump had told him that the attack was so successful that it knocked out most of the candidates who would replace the supreme leader. It's not going to be anybody that we were thinking of because they are all dead. Second or third place is dead. So where does that leave Iranians?
Well, the Iranians have plenty of bench strength to establish a new and renewed theocracy. And that's what this country is. It's a theocracy that wants to take us back to the ninth century, which is a very crucial period in development of Islamic culture. Um, the thing you have to worry about is the devil you don't know may be worse than the devil you did know. No one would have predicted in 1989 that Vladimir Putin would become the head of the Russian Federation, and we have no idea who's going to be put together by the Council of Elders in Tehran or Qom, if that's where they meet, to decide this. And so you could end up with someone who is far less sophisticated, someone who's more brutal. We just have absolutely no idea who it's going to be. Here's the crucial thing we do know. Less than 24 hours before the US Israeli war started, the negotiators in Geneva for the Iranian government gave Trump a better deal than Barack Obama negotiated in 2015. They agreed to severely limit the enrichment of nuclear material, which they've insisted Tehran all the way along that they do not tend to build bombs. They offered to open Iran up to American oil companies and other concessions so that Trump could have come out of this and brag, hey, see, I'm a better negotiator than that idiot Barack Obama. Instead, he bombs. What's the message that you would get if you are one of the leaders in Iran? There's no point in trying to do business with the Americans. They're just bloodthirsty savages.
I want to get your thoughts on this Washington Post commentary. So, according to the Washington Post, senior US officials have told them that inside the Pentagon, things are bad. So, it said inside the Pentagon and among some members of the Trump administration, there are deepening concerns on Sunday that the Iran conflict could spiral out of control. The mood here is intense and paranoid. Someone said there is anxiety among senior leaders that the fighting will extend for weeks, further stressing limited US air defense stockpiles. This is a concern about the lasting more than a few days. Someone said, "I don't often think people have fully absorbed it yet. Like what has to be done to our stockpiles? If often takes two or three interceptors to ensure a missile is stopped." So, I mean, this notion of things spinning out of control, Professor, do you think that that is probably correct? That's probably happening inside the Pentagon.
Well, the leaders of the major Sunni governments in the Middle East, which is essentially everybody except Iran, which is Shia, they warned the Trump administration just weeks ago, do not get into a war with Iran. They will try and draw us into this. They will strike our civilian targets. And that's exactly what they've done. The Iranians have said, you're operating under the umbrella of the US, you're fair game. You'll notice Keir Starmer, in a very carefully calibrated statement, tried to make the legalistic argument that Britain is not helping the Americans and the Israelis except in defensive ways. I don't think that legalistic argument's going to carry any water in Tehran, but it was very interesting to see him trying to separate himself from Trump and Netanyahu.
There are some reports suggesting that Trump is looking for an off ramp and that interceptors are running out quickly, as I mentioned. The time frame of this conflict and where the White House see it going seems to be quite confusing. And the Middle East correspondent for The Economist, Greg Carlstrom, he wrote quite an interesting tweet. He said that Trump is basically calling up every journalist in his phone to workshop different timelines and goals for his war. So, in the past few days, the Washington Post reports that the aim is freedom for people of Iran. Axios says maybe we can end it in 2 to 3 days. The New York Times said maybe 4 to 5 weeks. ABC said, actually, never mind, we killed those choices. So the timeline is confusing. He says that he doesn't seem convinced by any of it. Any of it, he's throwing spaghetti at the wall. Ultimately, I suspect he just wants to say he solved a problem and that he's vexed every American president since Jimmy Carter. So, Professor, does it seem as though Trump and his inner circle don't really know where this is going?
Not only do they not have a plan, but they fired many of the most sophisticated diplomats and military people who have studied Iran, who have contacts with Iranians, both openly and back channel. They got rid of those folks. They got rid of a whole bunch of national security experts at the FBI and the CIA. So the US is not in a good position. And Donald himself is so appallingly ignorant. If a journalist could ask him, can you explain to us the difference between Sunni and Shia and how this schism began? Donald would have no idea what they're asking about. He would not know that it began 1401 years ago with the death of the Prophet Muhammad, why it matters to American national security to understand that difference. And Donald will, of course, continue to defend the regime in Saudi Arabia, which was just as vicious to its own people as the Iranians have been to their own people, Iranian leadership to their own.
Professor, you mentioned this before that Trump, he campaigned on this America First agenda and that he would, criticize Democrats for getting themselves involved in foreign wars. Of course, Obama being the main pick for his criticism. But as of right now, 3 Americans and hundreds of Iranians have been killed in these strikes. You know, military will say that deaths are predicted, they're collateral damage when it comes to things like this, operations like this. But with the midterms coming up, and of course, the fact that American militants are involved in these casualties, will it impact the midterm elections, especially, when you've got a predicted 30+ million-dollar price tag per day when it comes to these kind of operations?
Well, most Americans don't pay attention to foreign affairs and they know very little about the rest of the world. Only half of Americans have a passport. And if you go back 30 years, it was like a clear minority, 6 to a quarter of Americans had a passport. So that's one. Two, Trump has a problem now with his MAGA base. I'm the peace president. There will be no more endless wars. Vote for Clinton or Biden or Harris. Your sons will be sent to die in a war with Iran. Well, he's the one who has launched this illegal war. This also had to be seen in the context of the Epstein files. So really new damaging information has come out that adds to the smoke. There's no proof, and Donald Trump says that he's completely innocent. But a whole host of documents have come forward, and there's been some great sleuthing from the half of the Epstein documents have been released that are very problematic for Donald Trump. So you also need to keep in mind that this is a way to divert discussion. Epstein is not on the front page of the New York Times today. Iran is.
Yeah, and just for our audience to understand that, that sleuthing, that was the fact that a journalist had done some investigation, which was then corroborated by many publications that said that the DOJ had left out some pretty crucial files that were from FBI investigations where one minor girl had accused Donald Trump of sexual assault. And that was kind of building up late last week, Professor. And then, of course, the strikes happened on Saturday. So, do we put this down to a coincidence, or do we say that the White House knows how to distract the public?
Oh, Donald is a master of distraction and diversion. And Roger Sullenberger is the journalist who put the pieces together that everybody else confirmed. He vexed Donald a great deal. There will be more tricks here by Donald to try and divert attention to get people away from the Epstein files. Because if, in fact, Donald Trump did what he's accused of, I don't believe his presidency can survive. Now, I will tell you, I've gotten emails even on domestic shows in America, people say, "Oh no, Donald prayed to God and asked for God's forgiveness, and he's not doing that anymore. So we need to forgive him too." If you're gullible enough to buy that argument, heaven only knows what you'll buy.
Is this a big enough distraction, Professor, from the Epstein files?
Well, it's certainly 100% successful at the moment. But as we go forward, first of all, we're using up a lot of our Tomahawk missiles. We don't have an unlimited supply of them. If I were a military strategist in Beijing, I would have people talking about, well, if we're going to move on Taiwan, is this the time to do so? Because the Americans are tied down in Iran. And is this going to spin out of control? And what's going to happen in southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, which has apparently been severely degraded, but clearly it's not gone? What's going to happen with commercial traffic? We've seen a spike in the price of oil, but oil prices are always very volatile. In my lifetime, I've seen them at $10 and $130 a barrel. Um, we don't know where this will go next. We don't know what missteps either Israel or the U.S. on one side, or the Iranians on another side, or the Sunni countries in the Middle East will make. And it just takes one misstep to really blow this up into a much bigger problem. And of course, how are the Russians looking at this as an advantage for them? How are the Chinese looking at this as an advantage for them?
Well, just a final question, Professor. Can you walk me through why the United States and Israel can plan strikes on a country with potential nuclear capabilities, kill its dictator, knowing that the aim is to potentially eradicate a dictatorship where Iranians are living under, but they haven't and likely will not do the same to Russia and Putin?
Or Saudi Arabia? Uh, because, the US decides who's our friends and who is not, and then we apply separate standards. I mean, let's not forget, for example, that I guess it's now 12 years ago, MBS, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, had 39 imams publicly beheaded. And what was their crime? They prayed for a better government. So we're talking about a whole variety of vipers' nests in the Middle East. I mean, why is the U.S. Continue to cooperate and work with Pakistan? And look at how successful unintentionally the U.S. has been in ending a millennia of enmity between Moscow and Tehran, and made them into at least friends of convenience for the moment. That took both administrations, Republican and Democratic, and an awful lot of really poorly thought through diplomatic actions.
Professor David Cay Johnston, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report.
Thank you.